Have you ever wondered what would happen if the stock market crashed tomorrow? Despite having access to the best information tools in history, we are still far from knowing if China will provide heavy weapons to Russia or predicting the outcome of the war. The quest to clear up this uncertainty attracts a lot of public attention. Daily updates on Russian losses and the deep state map are just a few examples of popular information sources that provide precise information, maybe even too influential for what they are. However, amidst the fog of war, there are two things we know for sure. Firstly, this war isn't going as intended by the Russians. Secondly, they don't seem to mind. It appears that losing hundreds of soldiers every day isn't a major concern for Putin, as terrifying as that may sound. However, this rate of losses is not sustainable by any measure imaginable. So what makes Putin so confident about this grim strategy? Does Russia really have enough soldiers for this? Covering more topics on YouTube is a risky move, but I've continued to do so because of your support. I kindly request you to hit the like button below, as it significantly helps the video in terms of the algorithm. Unfortunately, the algorithm isn't a big fan of war videos. Recently, Ukraine issued a nationwide air alert just hours after Russia launched a wave of airstrikes. Ukraine is preparing for a counteroffensive, and their defense minister has stated that the preparations are almost complete. However, the exact timing of this counteroffensive remains unclear. There have been challenges in recruiting and training across the Russian military, which could indicate a rebellion or internal issues. Russia is spending unsustainably on various fronts, including soldiers, money, missiles, and occasionally even ships. While we can estimate the number of weapons they possess, estimating the number of soldiers they can send to the war zone is a different story. The information needed for calculations seems to be missing, leaving us with a black box. However, we can still observe the trends by analyzing what comes in and out of this box. The entire population of Russia is 3 times that of Ukraine, but this population chart reveals some concerning details. The spike after 2014 is due to the annexation of Crimea, which was relatively bloodless. Furthermore, Russia's population decline is only offset by immigration, primarily from former Soviet republics. After the war in Ukraine began, maintaining positive net immigration became challenging. Speaking of immigration, it's interesting to note that the United States has a significant number of ethnic Russians, followed by Brazil, Germany, and Belarus. The Russians in North America and Europe reflect the brain drain phenomenon, where highly skilled professionals seek better opportunities abroad. Russia is losing the war for brains and land, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine exacerbates this issue. Approximately 1 million Russians have fled the country since the start of the war, mainly out of fear of mobilization. Building a strong army requires more than just mobilizing soldiers. It necessitates professional labor to maintain the necessary hardware and facilities. While Russia can mobilize soldiers, they are struggling to keep up with the modernization of their equipment. Tanks from the 1940s and 1950s are still being used, indicating a lack of resources and capability. Russia's inability to produce substantial quantities of missiles, armored vehicles, fighter jets, and battleships further complicates their military efforts. Although Russia can rebuild its hardware in a few decades, the tens of thousands of soldiers lost in battle cannot be replaced. Despite this, the Russians seem unconcerned. From their perspective, surviving until China provides military support or until the West grows tired of the war is the goal. They plan to flood Ukraine with more soldiers than there are bullets and anticipate things will eventually improve. But what could possibly go wrong? So, with a Russian retreat not really being an option, we enter Phase 3, mass self-destruction. The concept is pretty simple. You mobilize a large number of people and send them to the front lines to overwhelm your opponent, who simply doesn't have enough population to create a comparable army. It doesn't matter if your soldiers have rifles from the 60s or tanks from the 50s. They can still be effective. However, there are certain factors to consider. Let's examine the 2 most recent wars involving Russia where the Phase 3 strategy was used: the Winter War and the Great Patriotic War, which refers to the part of World War II where the Soviets fought against the Germans. In both cases, the Russians were in a different position. During the Winter War, the Soviets were fighting against Finland, a smaller country with similar geographic features along the border. The war was intended to be quickly finished by the Soviets, but when that didn't work out, they resorted to bombing civilian infrastructure, which proved unsuccessful. They then flooded Finland with poorly equipped soldiers and suffered great losses. In the Great Patriotic War, the Russians were on the defense against total occupation by the Germans. They could retreat into their vast and sparsely populated territory as much as they wanted. Additionally, their morale was significantly higher, and they had the support of their allies, including the United States and Britain, who provided military aid. However, it's important to note that Russia cannot rely on the same level of foreign support today as they did during World War II. Another crucial aspect is the hardware and equipment available to Russia. All the Russian equipment we see today is, at best, a modernized version of Soviet designs, and at worst, produced during the Soviet era. In the 1940s, the Soviet Union was producing a staggering 10,000 tanks every year. Today, that number is significantly lower, and the visually confirmed losses in the first year of the German invasion were much higher. No matter how many soldiers Russia mobilizes, power multipliers such as tanks will eventually run out, denying Russia offensive capabilities. The current conflict in Ukraine highlights this limitation. Even though Russia may overwhelm with numbers initially, the sustainability of their offensive power is questionable. Furthermore, the current war in Ukraine differs significantly from the Winter War and the Great Patriotic War. Ukraine is not a mirror copy of those situations. It is a larger country with its own unique geographic features and strategic advantages. Additionally, Ukraine has received support from the West, both in terms of military aid and political backing, which has boosted their capabilities. While the Russian strategy of mass self-destruction may seem viable in theory, the realities of the modern world present significant challenges. The limitations in hardware, potential lack of foreign support, and the determination of Ukraine to defend its territory make the outcome uncertain. Fortunately for Ukraine, the similarities with past conflicts end, and the overlooked details start emerging. One noticeable detail is the population difference. In 1939, the Soviet Union had 46 times the population of Finland, whereas in 2022, Russia has only 3.5 times the population of Ukraine. This population gap presents a significant challenge for Russia. Another crucial difference lies in the casualties. The highest estimates of Russian losses during the entire Winter War roughly equate to what they have already lost in Ukraine as of April 2023. This is disastrous for Russia, considering the impact of the last 80 years on Russian weapon manufacturing and demographics. Furthermore, Ukraine receives considerably more foreign aid now than Finland did in 1939, with the exception of aircraft. This aid, along with the determination of Ukraine to defend its territory, poses a formidable obstacle to Russia's ambitions. So, what is Russia doing to address these challenges? China is unlikely to offer immediate assistance as it contradicts their pursued image as the world's biggest advocate for peace. Additionally, Russia won't be able to mobilize people from the freshly occupied territories, since the population will likely be scarce amidst the rubble. Russia's options are limited. They can either lure people into the army with money or forcefully conscript them from the streets. However, even mobilization has its limits. The Kremlin realizes that nobody is more dangerous to Russia than Russians themselves. With no external threat of attack, the potential for protests against mobilization worries the government. Suppressing such protests would require meticulous planning. While victory may not be easy for Russia, Ukraine also faces significant challenges. A general mobilization in Russia may not start soon, but Ukraine can recruit in the occupied regions or do so covertly. The total numbers are uncertain, and Russia's Minister of Defense mentioned the conscription of around 300,000 people last year. It's unclear whether this figure includes numbers from the occupied regions. The uncertainty surrounding these numbers adds to the complexity of the situation. The war is far from a walk in the park for Ukraine. They face population concerns and brain drain, with Russia gaining from the occupied regions, while Ukraine suffers losses. However, Ukraine's morale remains sky-high, as its citizens recognize the existential threat posed by the invasion and receive unwavering foreign support. In desperate situations, unity is born, with the threat visible to every citizen. Ukraine has a chance of surviving this devastating war. While deep scars will undoubtedly be left on the nation, they have the capability to emerge victorious. Support from the international community is crucial in helping Ukraine during these challenging times. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more content.